People always told me I was lucky. They would look at her, my wife, and smile as though I had stolen a piece of light from the heavens. And maybe I believed it too. She had that kind of beauty that never needed effort, soft eyes, gentle laughter, and the sort of presence that made rooms bend toward her. When we first married, I thought I had found the answer to every prayer I had never even spoken. Our mornings together were rituals of tenderness. She brewed coffee the way I liked it, strong and dark, while I kissed her forehead before leaving for work. Neighbors would catch us in those moments and whisper about how perfect we were. I let them. I wanted them to believe it, because believing, it made me feel safe. But sometimes when the laughter faded and no one was watching, I saw something else. I would catch her staring out the window a little too long, her fingers tapping against the glass as though she was waiting for someone, or something that wasn't me. When I asked what she was thinking, she would smile, brush my cheek with her hand, and whisper, "Nothing at all." Yet her eyes told me she was somewhere far away. I tried to ignore it. Love has a way of making us blind, doesn't it? I clung to the version of her that existed in public, the one who held my hand at dinner parties, the one who pressed her head to my chest when the world outside seemed cold. But in private, shadows stretched across our walls. Sometimes at night, I would wake and find her lying awake beside me, eyes wide open, breathing steady but too alert. I asked her once if she had a bad dream. She shook her head and said she couldn't sleep. Her voice was calm, but her body was tense, like she was listening for footsteps I couldn't hear. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone has their secrets, I thought. Everyone drifts now and then. Still, the unease grew. I wanted her to belong to me entirely, the way I belonged to her. My love wasn't gentle. It was consuming. Maybe she felt that too. Yet every morning, she still made the coffee, still smiled at me, still kissed me like nothing was wrong. To anyone else, we were flawless. To me, we were fragile glass, beautiful but waiting for the slightest crack. And when the past began to creep into our present, I realized that the cracks had always been there. Looking back, I should have known from the very beginning. Love, at first sight, isn't always a blessing. It can be a curse disguised as fate. I met her at a friend's wedding, the kind of night drenched in champagne and laughter. She stood at the edge of the crowd, a quiet figure in a silver dress, her smile soft but unreadable. When our eyes met, I felt something shift inside me, as if the world had tilted and locked me into her orbit. We talked for hours that night. She told me little about herself, only fragments. She had moved cities recently. She didn't keep in touch with her family. She had unfinished business she didn't want to discuss. Most men would have found those silences alarming. Not me. I filled the gaps with my own fantasies, painting her as mysterious rather than broken. That was my first mistake. Falling in love with an illusion. Our courtship was swift, almost reckless. Within weeks, I was driving her home after late dinners, staying up until dawn just to hear her voice. I remember how she looked at me then, adoring, trusting, as though I had rescued her from some invisible storm. But there were nights when she would go quiet mid-sentence, her eyes glazing over like she was watching ghosts I couldn't see. I asked her once about her past. She laughed softly, kissed me, and whispered, "Does it matter? We have now." I wanted to believe her. Still, a small part of me resented those locked doors in her heart. I told myself I would protect her, even from whatever she was hiding. Maybe especially from that. When we married, people called it a fairy tale. But fairy tales can be prisons in disguise. My love was heavy, possessive. I wanted to be her entire world, to erase the shadows that followed her. Sometimes, when she went out with friends, I found myself calling too often, needing to know where she was, who she was with. She would tease me for being jealous, but beneath her laughter I saw a flicker of something colder. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I ignored it. I told myself this was how passion worked. Fire, control, devotion. But a voice deep down whispered that I was holding her too tightly, and that if I loosened my grip, she would slip away. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Not then. Not ever. And yet loss has a way of creeping in long before you notice it. It began with something small. Too small, perhaps, for most men to notice. A misplaced key, a drawer left slightly ajar, a flicker of unease that I couldn't quite explain. I had gone into our bedroom to look for a pen, nothing more. But when I slid open her bedside drawer, I found a phone I didn't recognize. It wasn't her usual one. This was older, scuffed, the kind of phone people forgot about once they upgraded. My first thought was innocent. Maybe it was a backup. But when I pressed the button, the screen lit up, and the truth began to uncoil like a serpent. There were messages, dozens of them. I remember the way my chest tightened as I scrolled. The words were short, urgent, and intimate. When can I see you again? Don't let him find out. You promised me. And her replies, God, her replies were worse. Cryptic fragments of affection, small pieces of herself she had never given me. There were no names, no photos, nothing that made the man real. But he existed. His presence pulsed in every line of text. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen. My hands trembled so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. A part of me wanted to storm into the kitchen, hold the device in her face, and demand the truth. But another part, quieter, colder, stopped me. What if I was wrong? What if there was some explanation? She had lied before, in small ways. I remembered the nights she said she was with friends but came home hours later, smelling of perfume that wasn't her own. I remembered the calls she answered in the hallway, her voice lowered, her back turned to me. I had convinced myself they were harmless. But now the pieces aligned too neatly. I slipped the phone back exactly where I found it. Not a millimeter. Out of place. Then I closed the drawer and walked out of the room, my face calm, my voice steady, as though nothing had changed. She looked up from the stove when I entered the kitchen, smiling at me with that practiced warmth. I kissed her cheek, pretending my heart wasn't breaking. That night I lay beside her, pretending to sleep, listening to her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a betrayal. I told myself I needed proof, more than words on a screen, more than shadows in my mind. I needed to watch, to study, to catch her in the act. The thought chilled me, but it also gave me purpose. I was no longer her husband. I was her witness, her judge. As she drifted into sleep, her hand resting lightly on my arm, I stared into the darkness and wondered when love had turned into surveillance. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I lasted 3 days before breaking. 3 days of silence, of pretending nothing had changed, of watching her every movement with a quiet fury. On the 4th night, when she left her phone carelessly on the counter, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Who is he? The words slipped. Out before I could stop them, she froze mid-step, her eyes narrowing in confusion, or at least the mask of it. Who? Don't play with me, I hissed. The messages, the other phone. I saw everything. For a moment her lips parted, as though the truth might finally emerge. But then she laughed, soft, almost pitying. You've lost it, she whispered. There is no other phone. What are you talking about? I felt my chest tighten. Don't lie to me, I'm not blind. She stepped closer, her hand brushing against my arm, her eyes wide with concern. You're imagining things. You've been working too much. You're tired, paranoid. Do you hear yourself? Her words hit harder than denial. She wasn't defending herself. She was making me question my own mind. I wanted to scream, to drag her to the drawer, to show her what I had seen. But when I returned later, the phone was gone. The drawer was empty, and she smiled at me, gentle as ever, as though I had simply dreamed it all. That night, she turned everything back on me. You don't trust me, she whispered as we lay in the dark. You smother me. You treat me like a prisoner. Is that what love means to you? I clenched my jaw, saying nothing. My silence became her weapon. By morning, I was the villain, and she was the victim of my jealous mind. But her act only deepened my resolve. If she wanted me to doubt myself, she had miscalculated. The vanishing phone, the rehearsed concern, the effortless shifting of blame, those were not the marks of innocence. They were the marks of someone skilled in hiding. So I watched. I memorized her routines. When she left for errands, who she called, the way she lingered too long near the front gate as if waiting for something or someone. I followed her at a distance, careful, invisible. She thought she had silenced me. But silence can be dangerous, because in the quiet I saw everything, and soon I would see him. It was raining the night I finally saw him. The kind of rain that slicks the streets into mirrors, that makes shadows stretch and flicker under every passing light. I had followed her quietly, headlights off, my car trailing just far enough to keep me unseen. She thought she was clever, taking back roads, changing her coat before leaving. But obsession sharpens the eyes. She stopped at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place we had never visited together. She sat by the window, nervously stirring her tea. And then he appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who moved like he owned every space he entered. His eyes scanned the room before landing on her, and when they did, her entire body softened. She smiled, an unguarded, radiant smile I hadn't seen in months. She rose and he kissed her cheek. Not lips, not yet, but enough to shatter me. I couldn't breathe. My chest burned as though the air itself had betrayed me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, forcing myself to stay still, to watch. Rage clawed at me, begging me to storm inside, to drag her away. But something colder held me in place. Confrontation would give me answers too soon. I wanted more. I needed everything. They spoke in low voices, their heads bent close. His hand brushed hers across the table, casual, practiced, like this wasn't their first meeting. She leaned toward you, him nodding, eyes bright with a trust I once believed belonged to me. When they left, I followed. They didn't go to a hotel, not that night. Instead, he walked her to her car, whispered something that made her laugh, and kissed her hand before sending her off. My wife drove home. He went the other way. And so, my obsession shifted. The silence between us had become unbearable. I could feel it pressing against my skin, thick and suffocating. She moved around the house like a ghost, careful, distant, avoiding my eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. The truth was already rotting inside me, and if I didn't tear it out, I would suffocate. So I asked again, not with whispers this time, but with fury. Who is he? My voice cracked, echoing through the kitchen. Don't you dare lie to me again. She froze, a glass trembling in her hand. Her lips parted, but the denial never came. Instead, she set the glass down and turned toward me, her face pale, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Resignation. You? No, she whispered. The world tilted. Even though I had followed her, watched her, documented every betrayal, hearing her admit it was like a knife twisting into my chest. How long? My throat tightened. How long have you been doing this to me? Her chin lifted, her voice steadier now. Long enough, and don't you dare act surprised. You smother me. You watch me like a prisoner. You don't love me. You own me. Do you know what it feels like to live under constant suspicion? Her words struck me harder than the admission itself. I staggered back, shaking my head. I gave you everything. Every piece of me, every breath. And that's the problem, she shouted, her voice breaking. You don't see me. You see what you want me to be. With him, I can breathe. With him, I'm not trapped in your obsession. The confession shattered something inside me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was blame. Somehow, I was the villain in the story of her infidelity. She had twisted her deceit into my crime. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to force her to understand the destruction she had caused. But the words died on my lips. My rage was too heavy, my grief too sharp. She turned away, tears glistening in her eyes, but not for me, for him, for the loss she feared more than the breaking of her vows. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words replaying in my skull like a curse. You don't love me. You own me. Maybe she was right. Maybe my love had been a cage, but cages are built to protect, not to destroy. And if she thought I would simply let her walk into his arms, she had underestimated the depth of my devotion. Her confession hadn't broken me. It had transformed me. Her confession should have ended things. Any other man would have walked away, broken but free. But not me. I couldn't leave it there. Not when every word she spoke felt like another lie wrapped inside the truth. She had admitted to him, yes, but what she didn't say mattered even more. And I was determined to find it, so I dug deeper. I started with him. Nights were spent parked outside that rotting apartment complex, watching the shadows of his life unfold. People came and went. Hard men with harder eyes, women who looked desperate, transactions that ended with handshakes and envelopes. He wasn't just dangerous. He was entrenched in something larger. The more I watched, the more questions clawed at me. Why him? Why would my wife risk everything for a man like that? Obsession? Lust? No. It had to be something older, something binding. I searched her things again, every drawer, every folder, every dusty corner of her closet. That's when I found it. An old photograph tucked inside the lining of a worn purse she never carried anymore. Her years younger standing beside him. Their bodies close, his arm around her shoulders. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. My stomach turned. He wasn't new. He wasn't some mistake she stumbled into. He was her past. And with the photo came more evidence. Letters folded and hidden in the pocket of a winter coat. Words scrawled in haste. You still owe me. Don't think you can disappear. You know what happens if you run. It wasn't love that tied them, it was debt. It was blackmail. She had never told me. All the nights she looked haunted, all the silences she wrapped around herself, they weren't about me. They were about him. And she had carried it into our marriage, into our bed, into every lie she whispered to keep me blind. My chest ached with a mixture of rage and pity. She hadn't chosen him out of passion. She had been shackled to him long before she chose me. And I had been her shield, her cover, her fool, manipulated from the start. I thought back to her words. You smother me. You own me. No, it was never me who caged her. It was him. She just let me take the blame. The truth didn't free me. It chained me tighter. Because now I understood. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war, and war demands retribution. Revelation hardened into resolve. The moment I pieced together the truth, that he wasn't just her lover but a chain from her past, I knew what had to be done. There would be no begging, no reconciliation, no quiet surrender to humiliation, only retribution. I began with his patterns. Obsession makes a man patient, methodical. I followed him for weeks, blending into the background like a shadow. He was careless, too confident in the filth he lived in. He spent most afternoons in smoky bars, his nights divided between card tables and alleys where envelopes exchanged hands. He always carried himself like he was untouchable, but I noticed things. Everyone has weaknesses. He drank too much. He trusted his routines. And most importantly, he was alone more often than not. I wrote everything down. Times, places, faces. I mapped his world, constructing a cage in my mind. He thought he was free, but I was already tightening the bars around him. At home, my wife grew wary of me. She mistook my silence for defeat, for brokenness. She believed her confession had shattered me, that I had finally sunk into a quiet submission. She cooked dinners, left careful touches on my arm, spoke softly like one does to a wounded animal. I let her believe it. Inside, though, my thoughts grew darker with each passing day. I began rehearsing the act in my head. The sound it would make, the look in his eyes, the way I would finally reclaim the power stolen from me. I pictured the scene in detail until it became sharper than reality itself. I knew what kind of night it should be. Quiet, wet, the world, muffled by rain. Violence feels cleaner in the dark, but this wasn't only about blood. It was about message, about reclaiming my wife's life from the grip of his shadow. She had been marked, chained, manipulated. If I ended him, I would end her debt, her fear, her betrayal, and perhaps, though she would never admit it, she might even thank me. I started collecting what I needed. Nothing too obvious: gloves, rope, a hammer I kept in the garage. I cleaned it obsessively, polished it until I could see my reflection. Every detail mattered. There could be no mistakes. Each night I grew colder around her, distant but not hostile. She mistook it as the remnants of heartbreak, never once suspecting the storm I carried. I caught her once, staring at me while she thought I wasn't looking. There was pity in her eyes, pity for the man she thought she had broken. But she was wrong. I wasn't broken. I was remade, and the man she thought untouchable was already living on borrowed time. I tailed him through winding streets until he stopped at a grim apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where curtains stayed shut, and sirens echoed nightly. I sat in the rain, memorizing every detail. Over the next week, I followed him again and again. What I found chilled me more than the affair itself. He wasn't just another man. He was dangerous. I saw him exchanging envelopes with men in alleyways, shaking hands with faces I recognized from the news. There were whispers of debts, of violence, of a world far darker than anything my wife should have touched. Yet she had touched it. She had chosen him. The betrayal was no longer just personal. It was poison. She hadn't merely lied to me. She had led me into the orbit of a man whose life bled crime. I sat awake each night, her soft breathing beside me, replaying everything I had seen. Every secret meeting, every whispered smile, every crime-soaked shadow tied to her laughter. The truth was undeniable now, and soon I would demand her confession. The night arrived the way I always imagined it. Rain sweeping across the streets, thunder rolling far away like a warning no one would heed. The city seemed hushed, emptied of life, as though it knew what I was about to do, and stepped aside to let it happen. I had rehearsed it so many times in my head that the steps came naturally, almost ritualistic. Gloves, rope, the hammer wrapped in cloth. My heartbeat was steady, not frantic, as if I had been preparing for this moment my whole life. He left the bar late, stumbling slightly, the glow of neon trailing across his face. I watched from across the street, my body still, breath measured. He didn't notice me. Why would he? Men like him never think they're being hunted. I followed at a distance, boots slapping against wet pavement, the rain masking every sound. He cut through an alley I already knew by heart. Narrow, dim, with only one way in and one way out. Perfect. When he reached the middle, I stepped in behind him. "Hey," I called. My voice sounded strange, deep, stripped of humanity. He turned, frowning, eyes narrowing as recognition flickered. "You." That was all he managed before I struck. The hammer connected with a sickening crack, his knees buckling beneath him. He gasped, clutching at the air, but I was already on him. Blow after blow, each strike fueled not just by rage but by a cold precision I hadn't known I possessed. Blood sprayed across the rain-slick bricks, washed thin by the storm. His cries turned into gurgles, then silence. I stood over him, chest heaving, staring at what I had done. The man who had haunted my nights, stolen my wife, poisoned my life. Now, nothing more than a broken body at my feet. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, only silence, heavy and suffocating. I dragged him deeper into the alley, hidden behind dumpsters, the storm erasing my footprints, the blood carried away by water. I left him there, faceless, nameless, just another casualty in a city that swallowed. Min whole. When I returned home, the house was quiet. She was asleep, her body curled beneath the blankets, her breathing slow and steady. I stood at the doorway for a long time, dripping rainwater onto the floor, watching her chest rise and fall. She had no idea that the man she once loved, the shadow she thought she couldn't escape, was gone forever. No idea that while she dreamed, I had rewritten our story in blood. I slipped into bed beside her, my skin cold, my heart strangely calm. She stirred, murmured my name softly and nestled closer. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but my mind was wide awake. Because murder is never the end. It is only the beginning. The morning after his death was eerily ordinary. Coffee brewed, sunlight spilled across the table, and my wife hummed softly as though the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. I watched her closely, every gesture, every glance. She didn't know yet. Not yet. But by the third day, I saw the change. She was standing at the sink when her phone buzzed. One glance at the screen and the color drained from her face. She answered quickly, her voice trembling. I couldn't hear the words on the other end, but I didn't need to. I already knew. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. "He's gone," she whispered, almost to herself. I set my cup down carefully. "Who?" She looked at me then, and for the first time in years I saw real fear in her eyes. Not anger, not contempt. Fear. "A friend," she stammered. "Just someone. I used to know." I held her gaze, unblinking. "People disappear all the time." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned away, retreating into silence, but her body betrayed her. She moved nervously around the house, pacing rooms, checking the windows, jumping at every ring of the phone. At night, she woke drenched in sweat, clutching the sheets as though she expected him to walk through the door at any moment, but he never would. And she knew it. She never asked me directly, never dared to. But her eyes said everything. The way she studied my face when she thought I wasn't looking. The way her voice cracked whenever I spoke too calmly. She suspected. She knew what I had done, even if she couldn't admit it aloud. Our marriage transformed into something new, something darker. We no longer fought. We no longer pretended. Instead, we lived in silence, the kind that suffocates. She avoided my touch, but she never left my side. It was as though she understood the invisible leash had shortened, binding her to me with every unspoken truth. I found peace in that silence. For the first time in months, I felt no jealousy, no doubt. The ghost between us had been buried, and I was the one who buried him. But her fear, it seeped into the walls, into the air, into every glance exchanged across the dinner table. She was no longer my betrayer. She was my prisoner. And though she didn't say it, I knew she wondered what kind of man sleeps so soundly after spilling blood. It began with a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate, official. My wife froze, spoon clattering into her bowl. I rose calmly, almost welcoming the sound. When I opened it, 2 detectives stood there, coats damp from rain, eyes sharp with curiosity. They asked about him, though not by name at first. A missing person, they called it. Did we know anything? Had we seen him? My wife's hands twisted in her lap as she shook her head too quickly, her voice thin and cracking. "No," she whispered. "I don't know anyone like that." But I saw the way the detectives watched her, noting every tremor, every darting glance. They didn't linger long, only left a card on the counter and a promise to return. As the door closed, I caught the reflection of her face in the glass, ashen, hollowed, barely holding itself together. The whispers started soon after. Neighbors on porches, glances over fences, hushed tones at the market. People love a mystery, and nothing draws them like the scent of blood. She felt it pressing in, suffocating her from all sides. Each passing day she grew smaller, as though the world itself was crushing her into confession. At night she paced the bedroom, muttering half-formed words, clutching her phone as though expecting it to ring with his voice on the other end. Sometimes she jolted awake, gasping, clutching my arm as if she had been drowning in her dreams. "You're not sleeping," I told her one night, my tone calm, almost kind. She stared at me, eyes red, lips trembling. "How can I?" she whispered. "How can anyone sleep knowing—" She cut herself off, shaking her head violently. "Knowing what?" I asked. My voice was soft, but the question lingered like a blade. She didn't answer. She couldn't. And I realized then that my revenge was not the act itself. It was this. Watching her unravel, her sanity fraying piece by piece, her guilt consuming her like fire. She had betrayed me, and now she lived trapped in the prison of her own fear. I didn't have to raise my hand again. Her mind was doing the work for me. The two detectives would be back. The neighbors would keep talking. And she, with her trembling hands and hollow eyes, would carry the weight of suspicion on her back until it crushed her completely. For the first time in months, I smiled in her presence. Not out of joy, but out of victory, because love had turned to fear and fear was mine to control. The walls feel thinner now. Every creak of the floorboards, every knock at the door carries the weight of inevitability. The detectives return more often, their questions sharper, their eyes fixed on me longer than before. They never accuse, not directly, but I can sense it, the tightening circle, the net drawing closer. My wife has all but disappeared within herself. She drifts around the house like a shadow, her voice a whisper, her gaze distant. Sometimes she stares at me with hollow eyes, as if she no longer sees a husband but a stranger she doesn't recognize. Other times I catch her murmuring to herself, fragments of prayers or confessions. I wonder which one she truly seeks, absolution or punishment. And me? I tell myself I did it for love, for dignity, for revenge. I tell myself he deserved it, that she deserved to see what betrayal costs. Yet when I lie awake at night, listening to her restless breathing, I feel the weight pressing down. The silence is no longer peace, it is judgment. Was I ever the victim? Or was I always the executioner, waiting for the excuse to reveal what I was capable of? I remember his blood mixing with the rain, vanishing down the gutter as though the city itself wanted him erased. I thought that act would cleanse me, but it stained me in ways I can't wash away. My hands look clean, but in my mind they're always red. The neighbors still whisper. The detectives still circle, and she, my perfect wife, my betrayer, my prisoner, spirals further each day. Her mind is collapsing under the weight of secrets neither of us dare speak aloud. She fears me, yet clings to me, because fear is all. She has left. I watch her crumble and realize that my revenge was never about him. It was about us, about control, about proving that even betrayal cannot free her from me. But what kind of victory leaves two people buried in silence, waiting for the inevitable knock that will end it all? Sometimes I imagine the handcuffs. Sometimes I imagine her screaming my name in confession. Sometimes I imagine nothing, just darkness, a final silence swallowing everything, justice, damnation. Perhaps they are the same. The world will decide soon enough who I was, a husband wronged, or a monster born of love twisted into hate. But as I sit here, pen in hand, writing these last words, I know one thing with absolute certainty. The truth will not set us free. It will destroy us both.